This SIG in particular is called Website Subcommittee and Technology in Courts. Our SIGs have really been focused on the committee work that NACM does. One, to get people involved. Two, to get people aware, because committee work is really the cornerstone of how NACM operates. So I'm going to talk just really briefly about the Website Subcommittee, but I think for most of you, I think you're interested in talking about technology in courts. And so I really want us to spend most of our time talking about that. And I know that a lot of this week has really been honed in on technology in courts. And that's because everything that courts do is really centered in technology. There's very little that we can do that technology is not involved with. So just to get the website part out of it, I'm also the chair of the NACM Website Subcommittee. Even NACM has not been immune from technology. NACM just used to be a fantastic organization, produce resources, publications, out there, educating and those types of things. And even as a board, we have found everything that we are doing sort of revolves around our website and a way to quickly communicate resources and those types of things. So the Website Subcommittee didn't even exist before, but we just found that, one, we needed to find people that had an interest, also had some expertise. So we've recruited some. Our main participants are from Multnomah, Oregon. We've got a lot of IT folks from there that help out. But I would encourage you, if you've ever been on the NACM website, and if you think that there's a much better way things can be done, send it our way. I was one of the key people that rebuilt the website several years ago. And I mean, I am not an expert. I don't build websites, but I've been to websites. But we're always looking for feedback on how to make it better. There's just a lot of information that we push out there, and sometimes it just becomes overwhelming and complicated. So we're constantly just looking for feedback. And I always say, on the committee calls, let me know if you think anything can change. And no one ever does, but I know people have opinions, so I wouldn't be offended. If that type of work also interests you, if you just want to dabble in NACM work, but like something completely different like website, feel free to hop on. Again, it's a very small group. There's probably 6 or 7 of us. Our most recent project, again, this is very techy. We're building a document library to store all the documents that we produce and have a better way to organize stuff. So it could be anything from something like that to the look and feel. So that's the Website Subcommittee part. And again, I really feel like this session would be really more beneficial for you if we just talk technology.
And just to jump in on the committee piece, one more, as Jeffrey mentioned, he chairs the website committee. I think part of the reason I got tagged to come in as well is that I have been for the last many years chairing the Joint Tech Committee. And as Jeffrey mentioned, there's a lot of different work that we do on different kinds of court technology. But one of the things that we wanted to make sure you were able to walk away from here today is knowing that there are resources available to you right now. And the easiest way that I find to get to the Joint Tech part of the website, which is a little bit farther away, is I just search for NCSC, the National Center for State Courts, and put in JTC. Takes you right there. And it will tell you who's on the committee, what kind of work we're involved in, when we're meeting, what type of resources are available. Right now, we've got a number of different publications and recorded webinars and other information on a variety of topics that are out there for courts. We've talked a lot about AI here this week, but there's also information on e-filing standards and jury standards. And I don't know if that's me or we've got information on different kinds of presentations that you could use for your own staff. One paper we have is called Courts Disrupted, that just looks at how technology screws with our lives as court managers and how you can adapt to it and what you can do with that. More recently, something that we've spent a lot of time working on that is if it's not of interest to you, I would suggest that it ought to be of interest to you, and that's cybersecurity. Even while we were here this week, you might have heard Casey mention it in the plenary session this morning. LA Superior Court got hacked with a ransomware attack, shut them down. So any of our courts could be subject to that. Just within JTC, we've had members from Georgia get hacked. Alaska's been hacked. Texas has been hacked. Kansas has recently been hacked. Pennsylvania has been hacked. So there's a lot of issues surrounding cybersecurity. And most recently, I worked in some smaller jurisdictions, and I thought, oh, nobody cares about us. It's never going to happen. No, it doesn't work that way anymore. It's not some 13-year-old teenager in a black hoodie sitting in grandma's basement, just deciding who am I going to hit today. This is a multi-million-dollar business where people are operating all over the world and just looking for any kind of weaknesses in your security where they can come in and mine some data and then be able to sell it somehow or monetize it in some other way. So we're all subject to that. And there are, I think, some good resources that are available there. So, and the other thing that I just wanted to mention, then I'm going to turn it back to Jeffrey and see if we can get into the conversation about different kinds of technology. The Joint Tech Committee is a committee of 15 people that are specifically appointed to represent different groups. So there are 5 NACM members on that group. Jeffrey and I are 2 of those. And Roger Rand, who's back here, is a 3rd one. Our others are Kelly Steele from Florida, who's involved with us, and Paul DeLoche from the Virginia Supreme Court. But that doesn't mean that all of you can't participate somehow. We often work through focus groups. We have different work groups that we set up for projects like the NACM AI Guide. We had an expansive work group that spent the last year working on that. So if you have an interest in this area, reach out to somebody on Joint Tech and let them know. And we'll figure out a way to plug you in somewhere along the way.
So, as I said, I really wanted to make this about technology, and you'll notice we don't have a slide deck. This is not a formal presentation. I really want to hear from you. Kevin's been retired for how many years now? Retired for 2 years.
Supposedly.
I spent many years working in the trial courts in Washington State and California. My boots were on the ground, dealing with court operations and the clerk's office and those types of things. And now I work at the AOC, and I've been at the AOC for 6 years. So sometimes I feel like I'm out of touch of what the true issues are impacting the day-to-day operations in courts. And the one thing I always like to tell people when they come to NACM conferences, if they haven't been, is you're probably dealing with the same issues as that person right next to you, and the person way in the back and the person way in the front. These issues don't change whatsoever. So the first question they wanted to throw out there, start with the good, is in your courts, what's working for you in technology? What have you implemented? What's been forced upon you? What have you changed in regards to technology in your courts and operations that's working well for you?
And this would be the interactive part of the, so feel free to jump in.
So this is Roger. I'm from Multnomah Courts in Portland, Oregon, and I can talk about one of the lessons learned. When we moved from our old courthouse, 104-year-old courthouse, to a brand new state-of-the-art courthouse, we thought that we'd be really wise and put in all of these public information kiosks where people could interact with the computers and look up case information and go to the state websites and get forms, and they have turned out to be relatively useless. And the majority of people who are actually coming into the courthouse need personal help. Those are all being removed. So an entire customer service area of kiosks are being removed and replaced with chairs. Now, we did implement interactive kiosks for customer service like at DMV, which are helpful because when you come into the courthouse, you have to go in and explain why you're there. So we have these easy to push buttons. You can pick your language first, And then you can pick sort of the intent of why you're at the courthouse that day. And that interacts with the customer service folks in the back, and it tells them this person who's standing in line has this type of question. So the customer service people can put them with the appropriate person who has expertise in that area, so that you don't end up putting a customer with a window help person that doesn't know what they're talking about. So that's very helpful. So that was a lesson learned in technology.
So kiosk have saved time, saved employee resources. They've provided people with quicker access to information.
Check-in kiosks.
Checking kiosks.
Yes, but website resources are helpful for people who are at home and people who are on their cell phones. But having computer stations that don't have a person next to them aren't so helpful, because people aren't going to go up and use it. Now, we do have a legal resource center. So one advantage that we did in Portland was that we worked with the legislature and we got the law library out of our courthouse. So the county-run law library is no longer, and we had those funds diverted to the judiciary, and we were able to set up a self-help center with those funds and have a fully staffed self-help center. So we do have kiosks in there that have access to the internet, that have access to court resources and court forms. But in that area, you check in and you have a person help you. And that is much more helpful, to actually have the computer resources with a person who can sit down with someone and guide self-represented litigants through the process. So that's been very helpful.
Oh, okay.
You're not going to get out of it that easily.
What was the question again?
What's working for you in your courts when it comes to technology?
So technology, we have a kiosk for OP, so people can come in. We live in a very small community. It's a small municipal court. A lot of the elder people don't have internet access, don't know how to use it. So we have a kiosk. That's been extremely helpful. It goes right into our case management system from the kiosk. The other thing I'm about to start is their tablets. So when I started 2 years ago, we had a fingerprint machine in my small hearing room, and the officer that covers the court would fingerprint when the judge ordered it, right? Mm-hmm. And then the kiosk broke, and then it was this huge thing, not the kiosk, the machine, huge thing between PD and me about who owned the machine, who bought the machine, why is it in my courtroom? This is all new to me. Finding out that it wasn't even under a maintenance contract. PD bought it years ago. I'm like, okay, get it out of my courtroom. It's taking up space. So we don't have that ability. So then PD has to go and open up certain hours once a week for fingerprints. So it caused them an issue. So I found out about these tablets that I can get from DPS, where we can fingerprint when the judge orders it. Any one of my clerks, anybody can get the defendant to do their fingerprints right there on the tablet. No information is stored. It goes directly to DPS. Now that the new fiscal year started, I'm going to be getting these tablets, probably just one or two of them. They're kind of spendy, but we only need one, and that will go immediately to DPS. It will relieve the PD from having to figure out when to open their counter, which they say it's 2 to 3, and then nobody's there. So we get people coming back, and we're like, you gotta go there. We can't do anything. So I know that it's going to be very helpful. I've heard that it works really well in other Arizona states, other Arizona courts that have used it. Well, in Arizona, we have Maricopa State and then everybody else. So
we have Harris County State.
Right, right. So technology-wise, it's really trying to figure out what I'm excited to get into, whatever I can do for AI stuff, to start with data entry, data count, data, get me something that can give us the data we need. And learning quite a bit about it through this.
But even before you get to that point, you raise, I think, a critical issue for court managers. And you may not have even realized you raised it, but I can't tell you how many court managers I've worked with or talked with over the years who have absolutely no idea how much technology they have in their courthouse. Just don't know. It's not one of those things that has been high on the list of priorities. They think, oh, somebody in IT is going to take care of that. And the inventory isn't there
No, there's no inventory.
And what I'd suggest to you is what we're seeing in a lot of courts, and Jeffrey, I don't know if you're seeing the same thing, but for years as court managers, we've always known that the biggest part of our budget as court managers is personnel.
Right.
That we are personnel intensive operations. You know, you probably got 70 to 90% of your budget going in there. Well, what we're starting to see now in a lot of courts is some of that money is shifting to technology.
That's where my
More
court,
and
I'm moving
more
my
and
budget
more.
to it, requesting.
And just like
Yep.
we want to have a staff list so we know who works for us, you need to have an inventory control system set up so you know where the technology is. At some point, anybody that works in IT is going to know, just from a security standpoint, you've got to have somebody that knows how passwords are handled and who, you know, what access people have to certain kinds of machines, what those machines do, whether it's a fingerprint reader or something along those lines. Sometimes with some of the lean, operations that exist, there might need to be an ORI number or some federal number that's going to connect you to law enforcement, where you've got disposition information that's being transferred over. And that's where you get into the battles with your sheriff or your state police or someone who says, no, wait a minute, you're not a lien authorized operator. You shouldn't have that equipment.
Well,
Then let them pay for it and let them maintain it. And you know, maybe their staff ought to come and take fingerprints. But
It even goes for like panic alarms. Like,
Yeah.
Okay, well, who's got the vendor contract for the panic alarms for the city? We have panic alarms and we're not allowed to be given a password to call them to test them, which we should be doing regularly.
Absolutely.
And so it took me a year to finally even get that in line. And now it's like, we need a new vendor. We need somebody that can address just something as small as a panic alarm, really?
Well, start pushing buttons. You'll get somebody's attention. Yeah.
Hi, my name is Shan Weatherby, and I'm from Multnomah Circuit Court in Portland, Oregon. So as Roger said, we had built a new courthouse downtown. And part of that was some of this stuff was planned as far as the new technology that we're putting in. But during the pandemic, much like everybody else, we had to do all these remote hearings. And so what really stuck for us is doing a lot of our high volume stuff online. So we continue to do traffic and parking. Because we do everything in our county. We handle all parking, traffic, civil, probate, all that stuff. So we're a one-stop shop. So within there, we created, since all those hearings are online, we created in-text forms online so people can upload any pictures or any sort of documentation for their cases. And so we continue to develop forms and stuff online for different processes for that. So we have that, and pretty much people can handle their case without even stepping inside our courthouse for traffic and parking. And if somebody does not have the capability for doing that, then we have like stations set up within the courthouse, because our hearings are still online, and then they'll just go to these, we use all-in-ones, and they're able to get on the WebEx hearing. We use WebEx for our hearings and participate that way.
Okay.
So that's sort of the main thing that stuck with us as part of the pandemic.
You read it?
So from the chat, I don't like hearing my voice right next to me that close. That's not great. So Constance from the Bahamas. Ooh. Hey, Constance. Introduction of the integrated case management to allow for e-filing with a station managed by a staff member to assist pro se litigants. Digital recording system with speech to text to reduce time for the production of transcript and increased accuracy of records. Websites with portal for requests for hearings, and introduction of a digital bail management system to capture the biometrics for persons placed on bail.
It's a lot of self-service kiosk so
Yeah.
far.
But I think I want to make a visit to the Bahamas and check all this out. Sounds like a good option. But you're right. There is a lot of that kiosk development that's going on to cover all kinds of technology.
Anyone else? What's working for you in technology?
We've got a hand back here, Jeff.
I'm John with the Wisconsin courts. We've formed a data and analysis unit within our operations department using Tableau for visualization. And, you know, we started fairly basic with reports that court administrators and other operations staff were interested in, but we're starting to get to the stuff that as a court administrator we all find pretty exciting, right? The meaningful court events, like starting to look at scheduling conferences and those sorts of things that, you know, add delay to cases and how we can reduce time to disposition.
John, I think that's an interesting area that more courts are looking at getting into, but they're not quite sure where to go first. So, you know, if you have visualization tools or examples that you're willing to share with NACM colleagues, I think that would be a great thing to do. If there's a way that we can set up an opportunity for that, because there's, you know, there's been a lot of talk about not just data, but data quality and the importance of that and how it helps tell a story in the courts about who we are, what we're doing, and trying to figure out, and it may be different from court to court, but what are those key data points that we ought to know about? You know, some of you might be old enough to remember the trial court performance standards that existed at one point, and it made us all crazy at times because it was like hundreds of standards, hundreds of data points, and you get to the point where you start going through it and your eyes just glaze over and say, that's just too much information, can't deal with it. So what do? We try to narrow it down. So think about in your court, as a court manager, what are the 4 or 5 or 6 pieces of information you want to know about your court today and every day? And think about, you know, once you figure out what that ought to be, building those visualization tools or a dashboard for your court management team to look at and understand what's going on. And it may be different for different folks. I'd be curious to hear what you think the key elements are. I know one thing in the last court I was in, part of my jurisdiction was running a juvenile detention center. 6 o'clock every morning, I had a piece of information that showed up on my phone that told me how many kids we had in custody. And that was probably one of the largest areas of liability in our court, or potential liability. So I wanted to know how many kids we had and that we had a game plan for them and that we knew where we were going with them. So that information might be different for some of you, but think about that. And, you know, John, would you say that the visualization tools that you're using are helpful and gives you actionable information?
Decisions when we're looking to balance caseload among judicial officials and how we can do that in an equitable manner. It allows us to look at trends, case filings, all that sort of stuff. I think the more interesting part is, as I mentioned earlier, getting to those things that take up space on judges' calendars that don't necessarily move a case down the road.
Right.
How can we provide that information to the bench in a way that they can use to move things along? So yeah, and I'm happy to show them to folks. If you wanted to see, I can pull it up and you can have a look.
Yeah, another area that I've seen, you know, very helpful. In Michigan, we have time guidelines for every case type that you can imagine, and many of you probably have time guidelines as well. Well, our judges and hearing officers may not care about a lot of things, but they want to know what their report card says. And if they've got cases that are getting close to going over those guidelines, they don't want that reported to the Supreme Court. So they're saying, okay, let's get that done. And that's a good flag. And there are ways you can help them visualize that with data reports and keep them up to speed on what's going on.
Roger, we got one more good back here, and I'll go to the chat.
Hi, I'm Katie. I'm from Minnesota. I work in the AOC, and so it's actually answering your question. So we also have data dashboards we have out on our public site. So we use Tableau for our public visualization. And we really did that to try to eliminate how many individual data requests that we get. We get a lot during the legislative session from media, et cetera, and it was causing staffing challenges. So we've spent some time, we've actually been able to hire temporary staff to help us build more of these dashboards to reduce the overall number of requests that we're getting. And so I just pulled it up just to refresh my memory. We've got like the number of court cases filed, and we also have that by the statute number for criminal, because that's such a common request that we get. We've got district court case filings by race. We have jury service and trial data. We just put out, I think last week, district court juror race data, so people can see that information. And we also have 2 of our top performance measures, clearance rates and time to disposition, out on that site. So it's in part to reduce, some of those requests that we get, but also our goal to be more transparent and have that information be available.
Yeah, and if any of you are looking for good ideas, just a shout out to one of our JTC members. Your boss, Jeff Shorbos, the state court administrator in Minnesota, is on JTC, and he's singing your praises all the time and talking about the different innovative things that the staff are doing with data. So there's a good example, and you push out a lot of information on your state website. So that's one of the places, if any of you are looking for ideas, that might be one state would be worth taking a look at. And some of if any of you have work that you do with guardianship jurisdictions, that's another area where Minnesota has been one of the leaders in terms of really digging into what's going on with guardianships and trying to avoid fraud or other problems that may come up with guardians. So thank you for sharing that. Roger.
So this is Roger again, and a shout out to the State of Oregon AOC for creating something called a supervisor dashboard. And Kevin, you were talking about data quality earlier. This is an internal dashboard that looks at these common error reports, cases that have been open over a certain period of time without a disposition, a number of other issues that can be targeted in the dashboard. And it's broken out by jurisdiction in the state. So there's a little bit of a shame game, but you can see how many cases they're kind of messed up and need to be fixed. So we have analysts in each of those jurisdictions looking at those cases, making the corrections in data entry and doing the research necessary to resolve those issues to try to improve data quality.
So dashboards are becoming a really common way of using technology. How many of you are using or dabbling in dashboards for any type of reason? So not many.
Right behind you.
If you're not, are any of the problems because you don't have the resources or the internal expertise to do those dashboards? At the Texas AOC, we don't have a big team like most state AOCs. We also just didn't have the skill set internally. We have a lot of IT staff, but they're doing other IT work. They weren't hired to do Power BI programming. So we immediately found internal funds and just went the contract route and found someone to build the dashboards that we needed. But in that, we built in sort of the clause of, before the contract ends, can you give us some clear and explicit directions on how to keep this moving forward, and so we can update it ourselves, because and it just goes back to the whole issue with recruitment and retention. IT folks, particularly in areas like Austin and the California, they don't have the desire to work in the public sector and work in the local courts and take the salaries that we can offer, that we're able to offer. But we did find that we were able to accomplish what we needed, at least in that area, through contract work. So I want to move on. Yeah, sure.
You mentioned dashboards. Those of us who do not have dashboards, can you maybe elaborate on exactly what that looks like?
Yeah, so the specific dashboard that we built through contract work was we were tasked with developing I'm not using this. We were tasked with doing a statewide bail program. So in Texas, we're not unified, so every court sort of does their own thing. Legislature wanted a statewide system that forced anyone that was setting bail or magistrating in our Texas courts to use the system. One, to get criminal history, and two, just to have a record of the bail decisions, because again, everything was done locally. And I feel like my colleague from Harris County is going to start crying as I talk about this project because it's been difficult for the larger counties who already do this. But we were required to do this anyways. And in Texas, yeah, there are a lot of rural jurisdictions that don't have broadband internet, that just don't have the tools that you would just assume that a judge should have. There were probably a lot of jurisdictions where JPs were not looking at criminal history when setting bail. And that is just a reality. And I don't think that that's just Texas. I think that probably happens, unfortunately, more often than not. And for them, that was perfectly fine. And the only way to solve that, at least our legislature thought, was just to force everyone to use a system and force them to pull criminal history. But when we got this project, we started getting a flood of data. I mean, just a flood that we never had before because we're not a unified system. So our dashboard collects the bail or bond amount and dollar amount, whether it was denied, whether it was set, when the arrest happened to when the arraignment happened. If someone had a history of failure to appear, and that's before they came in, those types of things. And as each month went by, I think we're seeing on a monthly basis, I think roughly 48,000 bail hearings set. So in the course of a year, it just started adding up real fast. And so we're now able to start comparing that county to county. We're able to see if it's mostly the courts doing the data entry or if law enforcement is doing the work, because that varies in Texas from county to county, who does the actual work. So we were able to start pulling all those things and comparing them. Particularly the county comparison was striking. Whether or not one county was setting bail for the same charge, how they were setting bail, and start looking at if the judicial practices were drastically different. And that's something that the legislature is very interested in.
If you want to play with that idea a little bit, if you think about every time you get in your car, you've got a dashboard in front of you. It gives you a few basic pieces of information. It'll tell you how fast you're going, if that's of interest to you. It'll tell you whether your engine's overheating. It has, those wonderful little things that are affectionately known as idiot lights that come on and say, check your engine, or, whatever it might be. So part of what we have to do as court managers is think, what are those data points that are important to us? If we look at the United Way, you can go to any large or small town in the country, and when they're doing their money drive, you see a thermometer where it's starting to build up the amount of how much money they've collected and they've raised for their projects. That's an idea of a dashboard. It could be that simple, or it could be complex. You go into, the cockpit of a 747 and you've got more buttons than you could imagine, and more dials and arrows and whatever. So your dashboards can be very complicated or they can be very simplified. And some of the software that Jeffrey was talking about and that the gentleman in the back mentioned helps simplify or organize that information for you. The other thing, you can always go, it seems like these days there's a YouTube video for everything. You can go on YouTube and just look for business dashboards. Search for that. You'll get a variety of things that'll pop up. They're not all going to be court related, but you can find things. And I think Roger's got an example of one for us.
Thank you. It's actually Constance from the Bahamas.
Oh, okay.
So Constance said, we're developing dashboards for ICMS to track data and disposition of cases, and we're also setting up a statistics unit.
Perfect.
So,
and again, that's another thing. All of us, I can't say for all of us, but most of us probably are court managers in one sense or another, either overall for a court or for a particular division or something. We may not get into all of these details on our own, but one of the things that we're seeing at state court levels some larger jurisdiction courts, they're beginning to look at their personnel and what kind of people do we need to hire as we go into the future. There are courts now that have data scientists on staff. That's what they do. They manage the data. They look at it. They, analyze that, and then they provide actionable information back to the court managers to work on things. So this is something we may have to think about and look for in the future as we go through. And this week we've talked about how much AI has come up in the conversation. There was a recent executive order that from the White House to OMB with an implementation date, I think, of later this year. But one of the things that they're requiring through executive order for all federal agencies is that you have to designate an AI compliance officer or an AI guru or AI czar or whatever they're going to call it for each agency, so that there's somebody that's tagged with that responsibility. And we may have to see us moving in that direction with courts. But we've got another comment back here, please.
Hi, Anna Beltran, Orange County Superior Court. We also have data analysts. We have a business analytics team that gathers and collects data, and they not only use it for the bench, but they provide it to the executive management so they can make financial decisions. Orange County has even taken it a step farther and has created a data academy where they've taken people within staff in the, I don't want to say regular workforce, but aren't technically in the data analyst field. And they're providing training to people in different operations and departments so that they are more well-versed in reading reports and data, and they can provide it for their units. So they have the initial informational session, and then they've carried it even a step further. Out of the people that have completed the Data Academy, they're providing the opportunity to utilize the information that they've gained from the Data Academy to implement a project within their own department.
Yeah. I think if you didn't catch that at the beginning, yes, give her a round of applause for that. But still, it's important. One of the things we do through NACM is learn from each other, and we try to identify where are those jurisdictions that are doing interesting things or creative things. Orange County is one of those leaders, and your CEO has not been bashful at all about trying to share that information. It's Darren, right? Yeah, Darren Dang is the CEO in Orange County, and he is more than willing to share a lot of this information. And even though he's a court manager, he's kind of a technology geek of sorts, and he teaches data science at a local university, I believe. So I know he's shared lots of information with the Joint Tech Committee and has been willing to let us know what they've been working on there, but that's a great jurisdiction to look at.
Yeah, if you have free time, just start Googling some of these jurisdictions, and it's on their websites. Many props to Orange County. They do a phenomenal job, and I think are a leader in that, but it's no easy task. I know that there's a solid team at Orange that works very collectively to make those things happen, sort of outside just the normal course of court work. So technology is helping in an immense amount of ways, and it sounds like, and it should, particularly because we're in a business that's so antiquated. But are any of you experiencing technology that's backfiring, that's probably not working as you intended, whether that's maintenance costs, whether that's just upkeep, whether it's just not accomplishing what you want? Are you experiencing any technology problems?
No, I don't want to necessarily say problems. The problems I have are funding problems related to getting the technology that I want. As a locally funded jurisdiction, I have to go to the powers that be, as we all do, but I don't necessarily get state funding. Grant opportunities are slim. So even trying to go to the cloud or go to I'm locally, my particular software is on our own server, and I've been trying to move to hosted environment to be able to do more, but even that comes with its own challenges. And so being able to explore more technologies becomes a challenge because increasing technology costs is my biggest burden. Every year software wants to go up on its maintenance costs, and I can't ask for more technology if those costs are going up.
Do you struggle with being a court manager, court administrator, and also the expectation that you know what the technology needs are?
Do I struggle with knowing what those needs are?
That people expect that you should know that. Has your role as a court manager changed? Because now not only are you supposed to know how to run your court, but you're supposed to know what the technology solutions are to make things better.
I struggle a bit, but I do try to work with directly with our. I don't have the benefit of having a dedicated IT support staff. I have a city dedicated support staff, and so I work directly with them, and I try to find out what other courts are doing. I don't have an IT background, but I try to do as best as I can to learn what those things are, and trying to work with them to help figure out what those challenges are.
I know that at the plenary this morning, Casey Kennedy, sort of did a show of hands of how many of you are dependent on local IT staff versus, county IT staff, and that presents its own set of problems.
Certainly does.
Any other problems that you're facing technology?
So in our courthouse, our main courthouse is about 4 years old. We have 44 courtrooms, all of it with state-of-the-art AV technology. And so for us, the challenge is when we get to the replacement cycle is how do you do that logistically, first of all? Because when we built a courthouse, we had access, but we don't have access to do that kind of work because our courtrooms are always busy. So for us, it's the challenge of how logistically we're going to do that, and also standardizing. Because if we can't do them all at once, how do we maintain consistency with our systems so that if our clerks move from courtroom to courtroom, they're not so different and they're able to function? So those are some of the challenges. We haven't got there yet, but we are thinking will be big barriers for us as we go to modernize our systems in the future. So I think that's something to think about as you're modernizing, especially if you're doing it on a larger scale and you have a lot of courtrooms. It can be a little bit challenging.
And I think there's this expectation from the public that courts should be keeping up. I don't know how many times I turn on the TV and see a T-Mobile commercial. It's like 4 free iPhones 15. I feel like it used to be, if you got to upgrade your phone, you were super lucky and it was super expensive. And now they're just throwing iPhones at you like it's candy. And I feel like there's this expectation from the public that we should have the most modern equipment in our courtrooms because everything else is accessible. But that's just not the case. Particularly if you have a lot of courtrooms and a lot of places to outfit. And those things go obsolete pretty quickly, especially with the introduction of new technology and integration and security and software updates.
Anybody from other jurisdictions where you use a lot of different kinds of technology, where you might have found some way to solve the problem that was just described in terms of how you do those updates, how you rotate new equipment in or out, update software?
What he said a little bit.
Please.
I'm, like I said, in a small court. I have a full-size courtroom and a smaller hearing room. And when it was built, maybe 15, 20 years prior, was the last time any of the equipment had been updated. So my goal has been to update and clean out the court so that it's ready to go strategically over the next 10 years. So of course I start with the small hearing room that's not used. It's only used twice a week. I start there and I found a vendor. They offered a great deal on it. Was going to have monitors finally on the wall in that hearing room, monitors out in the lobby. Doesn't matter if you have 40 courtrooms, 2 is hard. So here I do. I get it all upgraded, working great. Then all of a sudden we almost had a fire from the receiver out in the monitors. So this vendor is different than the previous vendor and the vendor in the other courtroom. I hadn't thought about this, lesson learned. So this vendor came out to try and find the problem. They could not find the problem. They said, you have to call the other vendor.
Yeah.
So that vendor came out
He did it.
and found the problem. They had plugged in the new receiver that they had to replace because of this fire, almost fire. Whoever hooked it up put the plug in the wrong side of the receiver. And so although it was the original new vendor's problem, my vendor from my other courtroom found the problem, fixed the problem, and so now I'm fighting to get the first vendor, you got to pay this bill. I have a maintenance contract with you. And you said it wasn't you, but it was you. So what I'm finding challenging is I was going to use this same vendor to upgrade the big courtroom, having to find a day and a time when we can do that. So the challenge is working all that. But now that I've got this new information, I don't know that I would use this same vendor for this upgrade. So then I'm challenged with how many vendors am I going to have to call to get a job done that should be done? Took 3 weeks to repair this. I can't be not recording and have video for 3 weeks. So it's quite a challenge dealing with the vendors and what you've got in your courtrooms, even if it's just 1.5 courtrooms. Yeah. Oh,
Yeah.
nightmarish.
But again, there's an interesting, as you say, lesson learned in there somewhere, and I think Casey Kennedy touched on it a little bit this morning. But as we work on different kinds of technology projects, us as court managers need to think about who from the IT side do we need to have sitting at the table with us? Who needs to be in the room so that we can talk with each other? Now, in some small courts, it feels like one person's wearing all the hats and you have to start talking to yourself if you're going to have a conversation. Yeah, right. That's always an interesting issue. But when we can, work on building those relationships so that we can get the right people at the table and have those conversations that are going to help us manage not only the maintenance issues, but the initial procurement process and all of that. It could be very helpful. Got a point in the back.
Yeah, just kind of technology, what kind of is working or isn't working. We found the same thing with some kiosks and things like that. We did a pilot for e-check-in and found very different results depending on what the business process was. If you have to use this, electronic check-in process versus if you don't, the benefits to the actual, court customer to do that. And it made me think of when you said who's at the table. I think one of the things we're seeing is that we don't have a good sense of what our customers really want. And so, we're creating these things that we think if we were in their position, they would want. And I think our customers need to be at the table. We need to be making sure that these are more user-focused technologies and systems. And I know that's hard. It's hard to get that, broad, very diverse set of opinions and experiences from our customers. We've tried to do that in Minnesota just on policy issues. So we've done a lot of surveying of people. We've been able to get like Zoom redirects after a remote hearing so that we can have them take a survey and ask them about, their experiences. So we've had a little bit of success in that. But it still is a real challenge to get feedback from what would help you. What do you like about our experiences? What do you not like? And then we end up, wasting money, wasting time, putting these technologies out that aren't really getting used.
You raise an outstanding point, I think, that we all have to pay attention to. But sometimes, like you said, it can be difficult to find the time or the resources or the right facilitators to bring end users together or self-represented litigants together and have that conversation locally. That would be the ideal way to do it, finding out from your own court users what they need, how we can help them better access the courts. If you don't have the ability to do that, there are a couple of resources that you can reach out to. Online, you can look up the Self-Represented Litigant Network. They have a number of folks that have done research studies and looked at user experiences and tried to figure out how we can improve, especially for people representing themselves where they don't have a law firm behind them or additional knowledge. The other area that you can look at is the Stanford University Design Lab. It's operated by one of their faculty members, a lawyer by the name of Margaret Hagan. And you can find her very easily online. She works with student groups at Stanford, and they are constantly reaching out in the legal communities and court communities and trying to figure out what is the best user design for people coming in? Most of their focus, I believe, I could be wrong on this, but I believe it's mostly on the civil side, not necessarily on the criminal side, but there's a lot of lessons learned there, and they have some publications. I've also found it helpful at times just to call Margaret, get her on the phone and say, what is going on with this? How can we improve our situation? And, she or some of her colleagues are always willing to jump in and help out when they can.
Yeah, I cannot stress the importance of that feedback loop.
Yes.
That's and the core tools, the customer service survey is, I think, number 7 or number 8 in the core tools. And surveys have been around for a very long time. That is not technology. That is just a basic function. And I cannot stress the importance of going through that process and getting that feedback, particularly when it comes to technology. I think we make a lot of assumptions that it's going to solve the problem. That's why I wanted to hear what was working, what's not working. We think that, this digital transformation will make things more efficient and make things easier. And I presented a couple of days ago that there is still a good portion of the population that is not there. There's still a good portion of the population that does not have broadband, and does not have a cell phone, does not have a laptop, does not have the ability to interact with us electronically. So we can't forget that. And some of them, the biggest, what is the word biggest? Some of the biggest companies out there with some of the most successful products only happen because they go through that user experience. I've done many of those with like tech companies where I get invited into a user design panel where they provide me with a prototype or their website, and they just want me to go through the exercise of using it like I was a customer, just give them the feedback. And then they take that feedback and they might just do a completely new product, but they go through that whole process. And I know NACM, I think 2 or 3 years ago, actually had a user design session where they brought someone in just to talk about the importance of doing that. And it's an exercise that a lot of tech companies go through because they find that useful because their customer base is so broad. But that customer base is probably the same customer base that comes into courts, and we also need to get that same feedback.
Right. So we only have about 5. Oh, I'm sorry. So a hand pop up, please.
You have more than 15 or 20 different cultures in your county.
Sure.
And we, in an effort to spend money responsibly, we focus on what's the best way to do this. What we found is if you build your website to speak to the Thai community, the Vietnamese community, the Korean community, your communication goes through the roof. The grandparents understand much better. The kids could still help them get something filed, but you're reaching your community, and something we just talked about. You're rebuilding or building that trust again, the court with the community. But having a cultural focus and communicating from your website or even from your courthouse builds. It also embraces and brings the community into your court, and you get a lot more support. Just 2 cents.
Michael makes a fantastic point. We work so hard to make sure that people can access our hearings, and we go to great lengths to provide interpreters. But do we make the same effort in everything else that we do, especially with our websites, which is sort of the main portal to our customers?
Right.
But I worked in this area, worked around the world all the time. Around the world, their court case management system operates in real time. We don't do that. So it's something to look somewhere else and look at a different culture, embrace the learning.
Yeah.
It's okay.
Great comments.
Yeah.
Are there other issues in the couple of minutes that we have left that we haven't touched on that anybody would like to raise that is a hot button for you, or something that you want us to be thinking about for the future? Jeffrey?
My steps in.
Just very brief. I'm from Washington, D.C., and we have very low rates of literacy in D.C. And so that's one of the things we're always thinking about when we're implementing new technology is, are people going to be able to read what they need to read to use the technology? Are they going to be able to type what they need to type to be able to respond to it? Just one of the things I haven't heard brought up yet.
I think I read 60% of the general population reads below the average or acceptable reading level.
And I was going to say something down the same lines, ADA compliance for our courts. I'm from St. Louis, Missouri. And we are required to make sure that the court is accessible to people under ADA, and we do not comply with it. So we often think about, we think about language barriers, but we don't think about people who have, who are deaf, who have visual problems. We come from a very literal world, right? But the reality of it is that our court is required to make accommodations to everyone, and we don't do such a great job of that. And we don't have the push that we need to make sure that it is accessible to all. We say that, but it's really not. And so when we do have that, we have to reschedule people, because when they bring that to our attention, we're supposed to make an accommodation, and we'll try to do that. But, on the onset, for them to even be able to share that with us is a challenge, because it is a barrier. Like, to have them say, I need an accommodation, because it's not readily available for them to access that information, I think is something we can work on.
Very good point. And I think with that, we've hit our hour that we have available to us. I hope you find this conversation helpful, just in terms of trying to get some ideas out about what some jurisdictions are doing, where some of the challenges are, what kind of technologies out there. It's interesting as we talk in JTC meetings and hear from court technologists. One of the things that we hear over and over and over again is that technology is not the problem. Technology is available. Software is available. It may be out of our price range. It may be out of our expertise level. But more often than not, the issues that come down with technology are governance. How are we going to manage it in our courts? How are we going to use it to solve a particular issue or problem, whether it's the ADA or statistics that we need for compliance reporting, or helping the judges be more successful in terms of managing a caseload. So that's something where we as court managers really have to step up our game in some respects and look at what's the governance that we need in our courts to deal with the different technology changes that are coming, and to continue to work with each other and look for ways where we can make it more affordable, more accessible, easier for us to implement as we go along. And hopefully you'll find either through the website committee or through JTC or other avenues with NACM, that will continue to focus attention on these areas and try to find the best ways to help each other out as we go forward. So please don't be bashful. If you have suggestions, if you have ideas, if you have something that works great in your jurisdiction, let's figure out how we can talk about it with each other and share those ideas and help pull everyone forward. So
Thank you for being here. We appreciate it.
yeah, thank you very much.